Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views. This is a special broadcast commemorating October the 7th. We're 1 year in, and the devastation has not gotten any better. The aggression and the mass genocide machine, the Israeli mass genocide machine, is still rumbling on. And in a bit, we'll be speaking to Sulaiman Ahmed. He's the host of Sulaiman Unfiltered on Rumble. Sulaiman, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Salam Media. Really appreciate you giving us your time.
Appreciate that you had me and look forward to doing this interview.
I think first and foremost, just a reflection. 1 year into this genocide, essentially, it's getting worse and worse. The Israeli occupying forces are now even pushing further south into Lebanon, and it doesn't look or feel like there's an ending in sight. What do you make of the year that has been, and the catastrophe and genocide that we've witnessed unfold right before our eyes?
Well, it's been a horrific year, a year that we've seen the level of devastation we've never seen it before. The unfortunate thing is that because, as you said, it's been a year, many of us have become desensitized to the horrors that we witnessed in Gaza. We've seen a significant loss of life. According to the Gaza ministry figures, it's over 40,000. Lancelot, a medical a scientific journal, has actually put the numbers closer to 180,000. And I think those numbers are probably more closer to truth, maybe even bigger, because remember, Gaza is 2.3 million people in a significantly dense area, largely a child population. The vast majority of people in Gaza are children. And so when you're bombarding, using bunker buster bombs, white phosphorus, your intent is, as you said, to genocide. Your intent is to basically cause the maximum level of civilian casualties. And that's what we're seeing now. Gaza, people are basically dying. People are displaced and they don't have access to basic food and water. It's one of the biggest horrors we've seen in our lifetimes, if not even longer.
And I think, in your opening statement, you mentioned something that was quite important. The fact that it's starting to feel like the world is being desensitized to this. It's no longer as shocking as it used to be. I remember in the early days after October the 7th, when the numbers were coming in about, how many people have been essentially murdered, it would be a gasp. Social media will be on an uproar. And right now, it just feels, as you said, it doesn't, to a lot of people, it's just another social media post. You scroll by it. It's just another headline. You scroll by it. Is there a way for the world to try and not fall into that trap? Because if we do become desensitized, we're essentially playing into the hands of, the Zionist regime, this genocidal machine, because that's what they would want. When the world doesn't care about the people of Palestine, people of Gaza, and everyone just moves on with their lives. Is there a way to mitigate the desensitization, as you mentioned?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think, well, in my view, the way to ensure it doesn't happen is to keep telling people the truth about what's happening in Gaza, keep speaking about it, continue to provide images, videos of the mass killing and murder in Gaza. But in addition to that, just to demonstrate the fact that we have been desensitized, in the last couple of weeks in Lebanon, the Israeli regime has killed over 2,000 people. And just to give you an understanding of how large that is, because we've just got used to these large numbers. In the 2006 Lebanon-Israel war, the war that lasted more than 30 days, where Israel attempted to invade Lebanon, South Lebanon, there was only from the Lebanon side 1,000 to 1,200 casualties. From the Israeli side, it was much less. I believe it was in close to 50 casualties. Despite that being the case, right now, in these last 2 weeks, we've had double those casualties, though double of those deaths, and significant number of people wounded. So people have been desensitized. I think the way to ensure that we aren't is to continue speaking about the horrors of what's happening now in Lebanon, the horrors that are happening in Gaza, and continue to speak about it both on social media and outside of social media. That's the only way to continue exposing what they are doing.
I think if there's another thing that is really stood out for me, and that is actually really concerning, is the role of the media. Number one, maybe we can chat a bit about just the general reporting from big media, which essentially control the world's narrative, Western media. What do you make of the reporting since October 7th? How have you seen it gradually change and morph to what it is right now?
Well, I've always had an issue with the reporting on mainstream media. It's basically lost what media was about. Media was about holding power to account, and it's not had that for a while. Not just this incident, but previous Israeli incident. The mainstream media has always played defense for their actions. You look at Karsled, you look at the bombing of Al Shifa in the past before October the 7th. None of these things were reported in the manner that they should be reported, the level of bombardment and killing that was occurring. Separate to that, since October the 7th, they have been playing a significant amount of defense for the Israeli regime, both in the United Kingdom and the United States and the wider world. And they're being called out for that. I mean, just yesterday, there was a CBS reporter. CBS is a channel in the United States who attempted to self-emulate himself. And the reason for that is because of the biased nature of reporting for his channel, as well as generally mainstream media. They've also removed and let go a number of people if they were reporting in a non-pro-Israeli way. I'm not even speaking about relaying or reporting in an unbiased way, but because they were reporting in a non-pro-Israeli way, for that reason, they were removed from their position as journalists or anchors. The reason why the Israeli war crimes, the Israeli genocide of Gaza was exposed in real time wasn't because of mainstream media. It was specifically because of two social media channels, which is Twitter and TikTok. Twitter was, generally speaking, a free speech platform, and so was TikTok. Even then, they weren't completely free speech, but they were enough that the crimes of the Israeli regime were exposed. You saw on Twitter many of us basically be able to do that, become extremely big for that reason, because there was nobody disseminating that information. And what you really saw from social media was that the world was with Palestine.
And can we, safely say that mainstream media, even going forward years from now, has completely lost its credibility? Citizen journalism is where it's at right now. If you're looking for real credible news, there's just no space anymore to believe what's happening when it comes to mainstream media and how they report. Just going forward into the future, there isn't a space for them anymore. There's no credibility. Is that one of the things that we can say we're taking out from this genocide that we can carry forward into the future?
100%. The mainstream media has lost all credibility. People don't respect their reporting whatsoever, and nobody sees their reporting as being unbiased. Even if it was this issue, the Russia-Ukraine war, or various other issues that have happened in society over the last few years, people don't see the mainstream media as credible. But when it comes to citizen journalism, initially there was a level of credibility when it came to citizen journalism. But now what we've seen is, again, with citizen journalism, there is a number of propaganda machines out there. Remember, for example, Israel has multi-layered approach to their propaganda machine. And one of them is to basically have social media influencers on their side. As an example, through various institutes such as Prager University, Influenceable, they actually pay people to write specific tweets. Then they have certain influencers on their books. So even when it comes to citizen journalism, one shouldn't just automatically assume that they are the arbiters of truth, but one needs to now discern the truth from falsehood analyze, comprehend, and use your rational mind.
Mm, mm. And just looking at citizen journalism and also media as as an institution, how can people go about picking and choosing which platforms can give credible news? What are some of the key things to look out for when you're looking for a source for information and news, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say any social media platform is the arbiter of truth, but I do think that Twitter and TikTok are probably better than most others. But then when one looks at that, you should read the information, analyze it, and research it. Now, the issue you have is, as you mentioned, on social media. So, for example, Twitter. I would say Twitter is one of the best platforms. But then what happens on Twitter is although there is free speech, the Zionist propaganda is due to the algorithm pushed a bit more. So what I'd say to an individual person is to look at the information, look at the credibility of the person, look at whether they're able to back up what they've got to say, and then analyze it for truth or falsehood, and then look at the data. That's what you got to do. We're really in unparalleled time, a time of complete disinformation, misinformation, and fake news, and therefore we need to be able to disseminate truth from falsehood, and it's not easy because we've seen many psyops happen. On October the 7th was one of the biggest propaganda campaigns there is, and there'll be many more of those. And so being able to do that is extremely important because it is the aim of the elite class to basically manipulate the rest of us to kowtow to their demands.
And one thing that really stood out for me while I was busy doing my research was actually Google. I think if anyone watching or listening right now can just on their computer or phone just Google October the 7th, and just the narrative is spun in a way that it favors this Israeli regime. I mean, the headlines are quite staggering. It's like Israeli commemorates 7th of October by shelling Lebanon. The amount of people that were killed since October. I mean, Israelis that have been killed since October the 7th is this much. Is Google also, a platform that has also lost much of its credibility on how they, put out the headlines out there? I mean, to find anything that has to do with Palestine regarding October the 7th and headlines that show what really happened, you have to click 2 or 3 pages forward. What do you make of this? What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Google searches is highly, highly influenced by Israelis, controlled by them, and significantly, you're not able to disseminate the truth. And in addition to Google, you got Wikipedia as well, which when you look at the Wikipedia edits, they are significantly edited by pro-Israelis. Remember, the vast majority of people are for Palestine. And if you look at what's happened on October the 7th, I think myself and many others exposed many of the lies about October the 7th, much of the propaganda, because they wanted to memorialize October the 7th as one of the biggest events in history. I mean, they call it the second Holocaust. They call it the second biggest event against Jewish people since the Holocaust. And much of what they said in terms of October the 7th are propaganda, are lies, and don't have any basis. And Google is a prime example of that. YouTube is another example of that. Wikipedia is another example of that. Facebook, Instagram are other examples of that. So there are significant media platforms that do not allow the truth and do not allow the dissemination of truth.
And another thing, just in case still sticking with the theme of media, another thing which is quite concerning right now is the amount of journalists that are being killed in Gaza. I mean, the CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, estimates that there's more than 128 journalists that have been killed. I think in almost every whether it's a war or aggression, journalists enjoyed a bit of protection. A press vest would in a way protect you, essentially. But there seems to be a concerted effort by the Israeli occupying forces to target journalists. Why is this? Why this time around the targeting of journalists, in your opinion, has been, a priority, if I could put it that way, for the Israelis?
Yeah, I mean, the reason they've been targeting journalists is actually really basic. The reason is they don't want them to be reporting on the truths of what's happening in Gaza. They don't want them to be providing the videos, images, and real life situations where a mass genocide is happening, where war crimes are occurring on a daily basis. And so, for that reason, the journalists have been targeted. In addition to that, they've been targeting hospitals. And the reason for the hospital is to inflict the maximum amount of pain and suffering. Every single hospital in Gaza is either non-functional or is basically on its knees. It's almost not functioning. That's the problems of what's occurring in Gaza. And so the reason you basically target journalists is because many of the journalists have risked their lives and actually have given up their lives because of the targeting of the Israelis, because they were disseminating the truth. You saw, for example, just now, when they were about to invade Lebanon, they shut the Al Jazeera offices who were also reporting on their actions. So the reality of it is because journalists are holding their crimes up for the world to see. You saw in the ICJ, a lot of what was reported was by independent journalists on the ground who later were killed by Israel. And so in reality, the reason they're targeting journalists is because, they want to hide the truth.
And just lastly, before I let you go, for all of us all across the world, people that have these kinds of platforms, and the one that you have, going into the next year or the next phase of this genocide, what should be our primary focus? And how should we, because as much as there's our side, there's also another side, which is pro-Zionist, pro-Israeli, and they have their own agenda. How do we also keep up with what they're doing and the propaganda that they are spreading, so that essentially, beginning with what we were talking about, when we started the conversation, that we don't become desensitized to it, and this propaganda essentially prevails. People with platforms like ourselves, how do we, maneuver the next year?
It's a very good question. So we know that the entire Zionist complex, although numerically is small, but financially and in terms of their control is significant. They significantly have a large control over the medias, and they're able to perpetuate their falsehood. So it requires us, obviously, first of all, to work around the clock. It requires us to work together to expose much of the lies that are happening by the Israelis. October the 7th is a prime example of that. And throughout this last year are good examples of that. But in addition to that, continue to highlight many of the crimes that are happening, continue to report what's happening both in Gaza and now the invasion and bombing of Beirut, and working together to do it. Because remember, we're going against, and that when I say working together, I mean irrespective of race, religion, or creed, irrespective of what your background is, we need as many people as possible on the front lines to be able to fight against this Israeli narrative. And it's not easy to do so.
Definitely. I think we're going to leave it there, Sulaiman. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Really, really appreciate it. And I hope we can chat soon, you and I.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, there you have it. Sulaiman Ahmed there, the host of a podcast on Rumble. I think it's a really, really interesting one. It's called Sulaiman Unfiltered. You can check it out on Rumble. But yeah, I think really, really key insights. And I think the focus on journalism and social media plays a really, really integral point in this genocide. I think, the war is fought on the front lines and in the ground, but there's another side to it, which is online, the space that all of us exist in, a space that controls narratives, and where propaganda can easily be spread. I think we've witnessed that firsthand this time around. So yeah, really interesting insights. If you've missed this conversation, you can check it out on our website, www.salamir.com. I'm sure you'll be finding the podcast ready and packaged there. We've come to the end of the special broadcast, but there are more interviews lined up for you as we continue to commemorate October the 7th, but we're going to leave it here for now. Goodbye.